We do like to report on the latest up-to-the-minute science and technology news on this channel. For example, this, The Observer from Sunday, July the 18th, 1852. This is page 7 of The Observer, apparently. Statistics of hot summers. It just goes to show heat waves. We've had a heat wave recently in the UK, and all across Europe, of course, and boy did we complain about it, but it's no new thing. So, The Observer, July the 18th, 1852, the aptly sun day. So, statistics of hot summers. The excessive heat which prevails at present, says a Paris paper. Maybe I should find the Paris paper and just report on that. Anyway, gives some interest to the following account of remarkably hot summers. The Paris newspaper would obviously be in French, so maybe that's why. So that's why I'm really reading the English version from The Observer. The English reporting from The Observer. In 1132, the earth opened and the rivers and springs disappeared in Alsace. The Rhine was dried up. In 1152, 20 years later, the heat was so great that eggs were cooked in the sand. In 1160, at the Battle of Bella, a great number of soldiers died from the heat. In 1276 and 1277 in France, there was an absolute failure of the crops and grass and oats. In 1303 and 1304, the Seine, the Rhine, and the Danube were passed over dry-footed. They absolutely dried up. In 1393 and 1394, great numbers of animals fell dead, and the crops were scorched up. In 1440, the heat was excessive. In 1538, 1539, 1540, and 1541, the rivers were almost entirely dried up. In 1556, there was a great drought all over Europe. In 1615 and 1616, the heat was overwhelming in France, Italy, and the Netherlands. In 1646, there were 58 consecutive days of excessive heat. Ouch. So they didn't really have thermometers in those days, or really an accurate way to check the temperature. In fact, the earliest predecessor to the modern thermometer was a gas-filled air thermometer or thermoscope invented by Galileo around 1597. So they had a while. Maybe they were measuring that then, but the actual temperatures here, oh, they do get reported. Okay, I jumped the gun there. A bit later on, they start to report the temperatures. Prior to standardized instruments, Renaissance physicians utilized subjective temperature scales for rough medical diagnoses. How hot is this on a scale of 1 to 10? And then the term thermometer was coined in the 1620s by the Jesuit father Jean Lurichon? I don't know. Deriving from the Greek words for hot and measure, thermo and meter. Then the first daily temperature records were begun in the mid-17th century in Florence, Italy, under the patronage of the Grand Duke Ferdinand II de' Medici. So that was really a transition to systematic daily temperature recordings. I think back in those days you could actually trust what they recorded as well. Observers, often religious figures chosen for their methodical routines, were instructed to record temperature measurements several times a day at consistent times. One of the earliest continuous historical data series was recorded at the convent of St. Mary of the Angels in Florence, spanning from December 1654 to March 1670. In any case, 1646, 58 consecutive days of excessive heat. In 1678, more excessive heat. The same was the case in the first 3 years of the 18th century. In 1718, it didn't rain once from the month of April to the month of October. The crops were burnt up, the rivers were dried up, and the theatres were closed by decree of the Lieutenant of Police. At that stage, the thermometer marked 36 degrees, or 113 of Fahrenheit. Interestingly, they were using centigrade back when this newspaper article was written in the 1800s. In gardens which were watered, fruit trees flowered twice. In 1723 and 1724, the heat was extreme. In 1746, summer very hot and very dry, which absolutely calcined the crops, and during several months no rain fell. In 1748, 1754, and a bunch of other years, the heat was excessive. In 1811, the year of the celebrated comet, the summer was very warm and the wine delicious. Yay! Even at Sirene. In 1818, the theatres remained closed for nearly and we don't have page 2, unfortunately, but you get the general idea. Yeah, just heat waves, not new. Generation Z did not invent heat waves. So now you know, Generation Z even. The same topic, and probably from the same article, was brought up in this. So this is a bit more recent at least. The well-respected Cornwall Alliance from 2022. They do conference lectures and all sorts of good sciencey things. And they published this article. Hot weather. Many a man has mopped his brow during the summer months of 1884, declaring it was the hottest weather the world ever knew, which of course would not be true, for the extreme heat in the record of the past has not been approached during the late summer. In 612 1827, the heat was so great in France and Germany, says the London Standard, that all springs dried up. Water became so scarce that many people died of thirst. I'm quite interested to know how it was in Britain at that time for a lot of the Roman invasions. Britain was always regarded as a bit of a sort of wet and boggy country, just constantly drizzling, constantly cold. The Roman armies, the centurions and legionaries and so on, they just didn't like being deployed into Britain. It's, oh no, I drew the short straw. A lot warmer here now. It's nice. Got the Gulf Stream. And it has been a lot warmer here for quite a long time, since the Romans were here. In 879, I guess we're still in France and Germany here, work in the field had to be given up. Agricultural labourers persisting in their work were struck down in a few minutes. So powerful was the sun. In 993, the sun's rays were so fierce that vegetation burned up as under the action of fire. Their crops just ignited from the heat. That's absolutely mad. So in the year 1000, rivers ran dry under the protracted heat. The fish were left dry in heaps and putrefied in a few hours. Men and animals venturing in the sun in the summer of 1022 fell down dying, and so on. Oh, Scotland. Brilliant. We've got a mention of Britain here. Scotland suffered particularly in 1625. Men and beasts died in scores. It seems the women were fine. Few. Meat could be cooked by merely exposing it to the sun. Not a soul dared to venture out between noon and 4 p.m. In 1718, I guess still in Scotland, many shops had to be closed. The theatres were never opened for several months. Not a drop of water fell during 6 months. In 1779, the heat at Bologna was so great that a large number of people died. In July 1793, the heat became intolerable. Vegetables were burned up and fruit dried upon the trees, withered on the vine, kind of. The furniture and woodwork in dwelling houses cracked and split up. Meat became bad in an hour. The summers of these years, etc., although excessively hot, were not attended by any disaster. Oh, thank goodness! We have statistics of hot summers that we covered in the Observer report from the Paris paper. That was probably why there was such a Paris and mainland Europe kind of focus from that, given it was from a Paris paper. This one is from The Day in June 1890, and it comes from up here. Summer heat precedents. A German writer dealing with certain prognostications, usually heard at this time of the year, of great summer heat, goes back for precedents. In 637, he says, the springs were dried up and men fainted with the heat. In 1879, it was impossible to work in the open fields. In the year 993, the nuts on the trees were roasted. Yeah, I shouldn't laugh, but I quite like the idea of that. Self-roasting nuts, as if in a baker's oven. Oof, and so on. Amazing that the heat was so great that eggs could be cooked in the sand, and that was in the year 1152. If it does feel a bit as if the earth is just catching fire at the moment, take heart, because it's been catching fire for the last 1500 years at least. That's just back as far as it's been reported. The Hampshire Advertiser from 1852. Hot summers. The excessive heat which prevails at present gives some interest to the following account of remarkably hot summers. And then it just reports the same thing. So the Shelby County Herald, Missouri, Wednesday, August 1901. The history of the world droughts goes back to the year 627, when in France and Germany thousands of human beings died of thirst. And they then report on the same thing. It just goes to show this was widely reported. A lot of it is also just coming from the same original newspaper article, but there were other sources that we saw as well for similar reports. The heat in several French departments during the summer of 1705 was equal to that in a glass furnace. Meat could be cooked by merely exposing it to the sun. Not a soul dared venture out. The Telegraph, 1930. Extraordinary heat in France. France, like England, is suffering from extraordinary heat. The shade temperature in Paris today was 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which is the greatest heat experienced in late August since 1870. So not the greatest heat ever recorded, just the greatest since 60 years previously. Numbers of cases of collapse are reported from the Loire region, where a temperature of 122 degrees was registered. In Paris, the police were granted special permission to return to their stations every hour for refreshing drinks. 48 degrees C recorded in 1773. The Morning Oregonian. A few hot weather records. We are now living in a comparatively cool period. 80 degrees in the shade is about as high a temperature as human nature can patiently endure for an extended period. Weather can be so much hotter, however, that 80 degrees would seem blissfully cool. Whether an unusually hot season is upon us, sweltering humanity talks about the changes in climate and shakes its head in a foreboding fashion. Is this actually... Okay, yeah, I was going to say, that seemed like quite modern language for 1773, but this is actually recorded in 1906. 1906, it seems. And, oh yeah, right there. Duh, sorry, excuse me. Tuesday, July the 24th, 1906. But let no one feel that he has seen the worst. There have been many superlatively hot waves in different parts of the globe and in different centuries. Fortunately, they do not come often, pretty often from the looks of it. For example, in 1809, so fearfully hot was it in Spain that the streets of Madrid and other cities were deserted, while labourers expired in the fields and the vines were scorched and spoiled. The summer of 1772 was a dreadful one in New York, and it is related that the principal thoroughfare resembled battlefields in miniature. People were struck down by the score, no fewer than 155 cases of sunstroke occurring on July the 4th, of whom nearly one half died. The following year in France, the thermometer rose to 118 degrees. So there we have it. To be honest, we're halfway down the page. What it boils down to is we live in a very hot world. It's been that way for a very long time. It's just when it's a heat wave right now, it feels like the world is boiling away. And so yeah. How do you feel about the warm weather? Should we change how we report and describe it when it's hot? Maybe. Just don't just go overboard with all the doom and gloom and the, oh no, the world's coming to an end. It's, yeah, the world's doing just fine. It's not to say that climates don't change. Obviously climates change, by the way. That's clearly the case. It's just that they have been doing that for a very long time and will continue to do so. And we'll just ride the waves wherever they take us. And that's about it. Probably a controversial one today. I just thought this is too important not to bring up. And I'm also trying not to get into the whole like climate science, the earth is on fire, how dare you, blah, blah. Bit of perspective on the whole thing. That's what I'd say. Thank you so much for watching. Do get subscribed because I think I might need some new subscribers. I hope you stick around. I really do. We'll be back with a whole bunch more science and technology news updates and reactions from also quite recent news articles as well. Do get subscribed. Thanks so much for watching. Leave a comment. Tell me what you think. And till next time. Bye.
電子の海へと取り込め進化の先へ未来はすぐそこにマフト